So before we start, uh, as we are seeing many people are joining, we'll try to admit people as they come in. We we will also want to mention that, like, please, it will be very helpful if you kindly mute yourself when our speaker is speaking, giving this lecture. And at the same time, if you have any question, please post them on the Q&A. We'll be monitoring the Q&A. And at the end of the session, we'll try to have all this question conveyed to our speaker and get them answered. Uh, and also, if you have asked for a PDH, we are going to give you one free 1 hour free PDH through this webinar. So if you have already indicated that you want this PDH, we are going to send that certificate after when this webinar is done. So with that, we're very glad to have our speaker, Dr. Shreya Bhemuganti, for speaking on her research on the durability assessment of binders with interlayer reinforcement for 3D printed elements. Dr. Shreya Bhemuganti is an assistant professor in civil engineering and environmental science at the University of Oklahoma, where she leads the innovation in multifunctional materials for resilience and structural efficiency, in short, EMARS lab. She has conducted extensive research to understand and tailor load transfer in fiber-reinforced polymer composites, develop self-monitoring concretes that detect microscopic damage through acoustic signatures, and create nanomaterial enhanced cementitious materials. So lots of work is being done. So her research has been recognized internationally. Beyond her research, Dr. Bhemuganti is an active member of the American Concrete Institute, serving on Committee 548, Polymers and Adhesives in Concrete, where she contributes to the development of specification and guidelines for polymer-based materials that is used for civil infrastructure. She places strong emphasis on the development of smart materials and systems, and aims to prepare the future transportation workforce through hands-on integration of digital construction methods and material innovation. With that, I would welcome Dr. Shreya Bhemuganti to her speech. Thank you very much. And please mute yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. Hello, everybody. I don't need to introduce myself again, but I would like to introduce my students who've contributed heavily to this work. That's Sijan Adhikari, he's a master's student, and Trent Rogers, he's an undergraduate student. Today, I'll be sharing our work on durability assessment of binders with interlayer reinforcement, which also fits into our broader efforts of 3D printing and concrete 3D printing here at OU. My slides transition smoothly. I want to start by acknowledging the innovation in multifunctional materials for resilience and structural efficiency lab. We call it the IMMERSE lab here at the University of Oklahoma. So though I'm presenting the work for the next hour or so, the work is not possible without the graduate and undergraduate students you see here, and also our collaborators and outreach partners that we've kind of established relationships with over the years. I also want to acknowledge our fantastic structural group who are extremely collegial and encouraging and very supportive of each other's research areas. So moving on. Over the next hour, I'll walk you through our work on 3D concrete printing at the University of Oklahoma. This also serves as the umbrella for today's discussion, where under this umbrella, I'll cover 4 major themes you see here. The first one being investigating durability issues. So in 3D printed elements with binder and interlayer reinforcement strategies, how we understand these durability issues. We also will be covering a theme of establishing institutional strength in additive manufacturing, both concrete and thermoplastic printing. I'll focus more on the concrete part here in this presentation. The third theme I'd like to address is actually diving into the 3D printed concrete interfaces for durability. So I'll go over some experimental studies and some observational proofs of how this understanding is being reinforced. And the fourth theme that I'd like to dive in is the workforce development efforts that we are putting in, and how this engages and trains the next generation of engineers. So before diving into 3D printing, let's look at the current state of our infrastructure. You all know the updated ASC Infrastructure Report Card 2025, and according to that, the report card emphasizes a C grade and D plus grade for bridges and roadways, respectively. These grades not only reflect aging systems that are struggling to meet functionality, but also they emphasize on service life expectations. It means increasing maintenance costs, more frequent repairs, and in many cases, reduced resilience under modern demands. So we've seen these aging bridges and roadways, and they're graded poorly. One pathway forward for us is to use some advanced composite materials that are able to bring some unique advantages over traditional concrete and steel. We already have a very complicated material of concrete, which is 80% of our built environment, which has a tremendous kind of complex networks inside of it. But we are bringing in here some unique solutions through composite materials. These materials are corrosion resistant, they are high strength, lightweight, durable, and also require low maintenance. So the combination is particularly valuable for infrastructure. We also see this in terms of the current applications of composite materials. For example, we have aerospace and automobile industries using these composites already. We also have reinforcing bars that we use in civil structures. And the primary reason, if you look at what I'm showing here, which is called an Ashby chart, this high strength and low weight, so strength to weights versus stiffness to weight ratios, you'll see that what we call composites and highlighting glass fiber and carbon fiber reinforced composites, they fall in this sweet spot compared to metals and traditional polymers. So they provide this high performance, but also at much less weight. And when civil infrastructure comes into consideration, corrosion resistance also becomes this really interesting advantage. So our research leverages these advantages by embedding composite reinforcement in concrete elements and studying how they are interacting with each other and how their behavior and responses change. So here's how we think, and when I say we at Immerse Lab and our team, how we think about our research. We are starting from the microscale of fibers and binders, and we enter the lamina and laminate levels, and ultimately up to the structural scale. So at micromechanics, at the micro scale, we look at how binders, fibers, also incorporation of nanomaterials like carbon nanotubes, how do they interact? We look at both experimental and computational modeling. What this helps us is to understand the fundamental mechanisms of strength and durability. Then we enter the lamina and laminate kind of levels where we're moving up in scale. We investigate some reinforcement related relationships with concrete and how fabrics, grids, tapes, how can we embed these in order to improve bonding and load transfer between layers of these two unique materials. We conduct some durability studies as well at the laminate levels, like freeze-thaw and chemical ingress and some long-term corrosion kind of durability setups. And at the structural analysis level, we actually look at the structural level where beams, elements, and understand their performance under sort of a laboratory simulated but real world loading and environmental conditions. So This really allows us to connect what we learn at these micro and mesoscale levels all the way to the infrastructure system. So our team's strength is working across multiple scales, from material science fundamentals to large-scale structural behavior. And we integrate these into experiments and computational models. So with that foundation, and we apply these trends to one of the most pressing issues in 3D printed concrete, which is durability. So within durability, our emphasis is on the interface behavior, but I'll get into that more and more as we transition through the slides. So I'd like to start before just diving into 3D printing. I want to introduce why it's important to understand the role of interfaces in these cementitious systems. So interfaces, either manually created or naturally existing, they're often the weakest link in layered or just these layer on layer building concrete structures. And they could be the means to control some sort of a long-term durability aspect. So if you look at this picture that I'm showing here, this is already a 3D printed structure where reinforcement is used within, right? There are already layer by layer building happening there, which creates these naturally occurring interfaces, which become also these cold joints. So where we started essentially to investigate this problem is, as a first step, we created some manual interfaces. So we made controlled specimens where we created manual interfaces. If you can see here, this is a very simple flexural specimen where we curated the mold such a way that we have this interface that we could incorporate some reinforcement within. So we simulated this layered construction process and we casted the concrete in stages. So this allowed us to systematically study how these interfaces could be behaving. So when we looked at those specimens after, the typical fabrication and the concrete curing, we went ahead to do some exposure studies for durability. So here we see a standard chemical ingress chamber with 6% sodium chloride solution. We've maintained every day a pH to be less than 2. And when we come to the freeze-thaw chamber here, we've subjected these interfaces to freeze and thaw environments as well. How the graph goes up and down, what are the ranges of temperatures that we targeted? I believe it's minus 40 to 40 C is all in our SBTC progress report as well, if you want to take a look at that. So essentially, we are using this to gain insights to serve as the foundation for 3D printing studies, and you will see what sort of an observational results we get. For these interfaces, the actual reinforcement that you're seeing within are these types of reinforcements. We've used steel mesh, carbon fiber, and glass fiber polymers. And if you look at these pictures taken with a microscope, you see that the steel mesh has a 200 by 200 micron opening size, and the CFRP is a 280 by 180 micron, and GFRP is a 390 by 570 micron. So these are like variety of materials as well as opening patterns. Also, to notice these details, they matter because the pore size and geometry, they affect bonding with cement paste and also the resistance to crack growth. So we wanted to use these 3 different reinforcement strategies as the variables and essentially to study how they impact the durability of these interfaces and eventually in the 3D printing as well. Moving on, I want to dive into the results of this particular specimen testing that we performed. If you looked at the freeze-thaw results, we've gotten the resonant frequency on the y-axis here, and the x-axis is the number of cycles. So after repeated freeze-thaw cycling, if you look at the specimens that you see here also, they represent some aggressive deterioration environments. So on the right, you can see these cross-sections of failed specimens and these red boxes highlighting cracking and delamination. Some along the interfaces, some initiating from the interfaces, but these these damages exactly show us how sort of a freeze-thaw kind of environment physically affected these specimens. We stopped at 300 cycles because there was no downward trend, and we basically halted the freeze and thaw and then proceeded to testing. So first looking at the left side, now this is chemical ingress. You can see how the reinforcement experienced that sort of a damage, mostly because it's external and there is an overhang. But to understand more of the flexural performance of these specimens, if you look at the right side graphs, these specimens observed some sort of degradation in the mechanical strength, especially GFRP. So the glass fiber reinforced polymer, we could see up to 56.5% of reduction in the chemical ingress alone. And this, of course, relates back to how chemical ingress can accelerate corrosion and deterioration at the composite concrete interface. And whether it's freeze-thaw or chemical ingress, the message we got from these sort of pilot study was these weak zones are able to sort of inherently create some deterioration mechanisms or also accelerate the deterioration mechanisms. And it's important for us to understand how in the long term this affects us. So these were conducted up to 90 days, which is about 3 months, and we tested these specimens. So if we take this knowledge and up to this point where we've studied these manually created interfaces under freeze-thaw and chemical ingress, the key lesson is that interfaces can control durability. So unlike a traditionally cast concrete, which tends to essentially encapsulate the reinforcement because you have that cover that you use, and also the formwork, which essentially from the beginning itself is protecting your concrete during the setting process and the hardening process. So printed elements, however, is formwork free. Therefore, it could be possible that it seems possible that there could be potential pathways for ingress. So in concrete 3D printing, this is something that we need to think about because the entire element, as you can see here, is layered interfaces. This is a little more exaggerated so as to show the interface itself. But if you look at each of these interfaces and you're placing either reinforcement at those interfaces or within the element itself, there is possibility that temperature changes and the chemical or chloride ingress could potentially damage the interface. And then from there could be microcracks and severe cracking that can evolve. So we are exploring ways to embed reinforcements directly. There's a huge push for that in these interfaces. So that's why we would like to know how we could use this, but still address any durability issues or even understand at this stage. So just to kind of have this existing knowledge, problem statement, and objectives in one slide, what do we know so far? We've seen that chemical environments, and focusing here on chemical ingress because freeze and thaw, we did stop at 300 cycles and there was not a lot of deterioration we observed. So we are focusing on chemical ingress, and we might also look into freeze and thaw in our later reports. But if we look at the existing knowledge, we've seen a reduced flexural performance by at least 56.5% in GFRP related reinforcements. So what is our problem statement? It's that 3D printed elements have naturally created interfaces or cold joints. And therefore, the reinforcement incorporated at the interfaces between these successive layers, they may be at an increased risk of exposure to environmental conditions. So our objective is establish this initiative and more like a program, which is an institutional concrete 3D printing program to investigate mitigate these deterioration mechanisms, and how can we understand with this particular environment, what are the effects on mechanical, material, and also the durability attributes of these 3D printed elements. We focus both on polymeric and concrete 3D printing. Here in this presentation, I'm talking about concrete 3D printing specifically. So with that in mind, we'll now move into the theme of establishing institutional strength in 3D concrete printing. So here at the University of Oklahoma, we've established this particular concrete 3D printing sort of a lab in Fierce Lab, and I will be running over some slides to explain you that. But why is this matters? Why this matters is this is not just about individual projects, but it's more towards building a program and with the right tools, facilities, and collaborations that can make OU a hub for concrete printing in transportation and other infrastructure. So by investing in these capabilities, equipment, testing frameworks, partnerships, we aim to position ourselves to add to the scientific knowledge of this emerging field. So in the next few slides, I'll be going over how we created that sort of a foundation. If you already are an expert in concrete 3D printing, I hope to learn from you. If you want to know more about concrete 3D printing, I think these next few slides will help you get some interest in that. Okay, so I'm really starting from the basics. So how did we acquire the 3D printer? We built this capacity at OU through the Strategic Equipment Investment Program. This is a VPRP initiative which supports some strategic equipment. And I'm thankful to the faculty across major schools, including civil engineering and environmental science, to have collaborated on this proposal and acquired this particular equipment. We're looking at the SCARA Elite Roadrunner 4M. It's acquired from 3D Porter. Right now, it's located in the Fierce Structural Engineering Lab here at OU. So if you look at the print area here, we have about 20 feet of a print area. You see in gray is the print area. The white area is actually where the printer is situated. So we're looking at about a 5-foot radius from where the printer is located around. So it can print this way and this way, and it runs on this particular rail that you see. So really going into step one, it was unboxing, and when it was delivered, right, the printer first arrived. The components came carefully in a package, but we had some problems with some particular crates too. So these are some expectations, right? You have to understand the delays and of these huge equipment assemblies. You can imagine this wasn't just a plug and play setup. Each of these components had to be assembled. They were calibrated, integrated into the lab space. This is where my master student, Sijan, comes into picture, where he was just on it from day one. So this slide also emphasizes it's sort of a behind the scenes effort. You see the printing, you see the videos and stuff, but actually what happened behind the scene is a good way to also remember those moments where we had to deal with all this. So we unpack the components. You see here, the first step was actually laying out the base rails. You can see them in still their shipping frame, but actually aligning with the area taped out on the floor. It looks simple, but it was a little bit of a challenge because we want to ensure that the base is properly aligned and all future prints get affected. So smallest misalignments can get affected. So you'll notice that this actual blue tape is what you saw in the previous plan before. So it's like the envelope that we create to actually be able to print. Now these images capture the installation of the this robotic arm 3D printer on a rail, and the motion control system, the probes responsible for positioning the nozzle during printing. We don't want the printer to actually get like hit the other axis. So calibrating these probes for the stop and start was very important. This particular stage also demonstrates how accuracy in the assembly directly translates to print quality. Any misalignment in these systems would result in a layer shifting or poor bonding between passes. So all those we learn as we trial and run multiple trials. But it's simple for me to say now because we've seen all that. So if you see this close up on the right, you can also see the belt drive that moves the carriage. So this allows for controlled deposition and consistent extrusion through the nozzle. So this is all essential for printing the specimens. So this slide, we're actually showing the SketchUp 3D. SketchUp, we started with a very simple sort of a design. It's actually important to understand that starting with a simple design without too many complications in geometry helps us really understand, flow related properties and mixed design and all that. So what sort of an expectation we have. Then if you look at this extruder pump and rotor stator, the pump itself, we acquired it from 3D Potter. The rotor stator configuration is actually very important. This is what we realized also later on in the stages. Maintaining a steady flow rate is just as important as the mixed design. So any fluctuations can cause defects, gaps, bulging, also like layer collapse and all these kinds of problems. So when you look at the rotor stator, you see these sort of a coil-like structure. And this actually helps pushing the material and pumping the material out. To be very honest, this is the heart of the pump itself. So how we can regulate the material's flow to the nozzle is affected truly by this rotor stator configuration, which we had several problems with, and we had to send it back to the manufacturer too and get another one as well. So there is a rubber-like material that's inside too. So that got affected with temperature as well. And when you're dealing with concrete, the students had really hats off to them because you have to clean the machine on time, make sure there is no debris inside this rotor stator to be able to actually pump up the material. So we started off with this, the rectangular prism, reduced variables, helped isolate how the mix design and actually the extrusion system itself interacted. We didn't complicate our process too much. Simplified 3D is what we used to slice our 3D models. So this slicer interface is where we configured the printer settings. And if you look at a traditional fused deposition modeling plastic printer, it's like that, but it's adapted for concrete. So if you look at specific parameters here, like nozzle diameter, we had a 19 millimeter nozzle diameter, which is obviously much larger than plastic printers, right? So we had to adjust those extrusion multipliers and control flow rate because these are critical parameters. And if extrusion is too low, we get weak, sort of porous layers. If it's too high, then the layers may actually collapse. They might actually lose shape. So it's a bit of a learning curve. We learned a lot during this process. And again, I have to give it to the students who worked on this constantly. So from plastic printing, which I was majorly focused on in my dissertation studies, to coming to this concrete 3D printing, it was a lot of a learning curve because rheology, yield stress, setting time, all these parameters do not necessarily affect a lot in plastic 3D printing. And it's not thermal sort of a relationship. So it was a huge learning curve. So here we define the layer height. We are looking at about 11 millimeters, and this was also tuned to balance shape, stability, and also time because our mix is also setting. So too thin and just like lapse of printing, all that weakens the print layers again. So we slowed down the first layer. We make sure the adhesion and there is no collapse of the building layers on top of it. So there was a sort of a strategy we had to kind of learn. Also, if you look at just infill patterns, we wanted to simulate more of structural scale specimens. And so we use this 99%, close to 100% infill pattern. Essentially, we are not printing hollow structures. So remember, we want to study reinforcement at these interfaces too. So printing hollow structure just didn't make sense for us. We wanted these really bulky elements that have these reinforcements in between. So we are eliminating the factors of just concrete hollowness related parameters. So when you print on layer with this concrete 3D printing, unlike plastic 3D printing, there is no fusion between the layers. So there is more of a mechanical interlocking between these layers. So infill pattern and layer height are very, very key to establishing this strength. So we started off with this particular infill pattern. Now, of course, a zigzag pattern would create much more of an interlock. We started with this pattern because we also wanted to look at, in our first trials, buildability. This is a straightforward inline extrusion path. It helped us really understand buildability. I will show you in another picture later. But the aligned layers allowed us to observe how the mix held the shape, whether layers stacked without collapse, how the nozzle motion translated into the actual deposition of this concrete mix. So a lot of confidence gaining sort of trials. 3D Potter itself has their interface for 3D printing. So the Simplify 3D, when it generated the G code, you essentially upload it into the 3D Potter interface and you finalize the print path and the machine interface and all these parameters. And that's also, I do agree they were a lot of help during the understanding this online workflow itself. So again, a bit of a learning curve, but I think with the right manufacturer and also the right team, it's very much possible. So concurrently, while we are assembling and calibrating the printer, we also started on one end with existing experiences of concrete mix design itself. We started material characterization to ensure our mixes were printable. We did not have printable mixes. We had to develop those mixes. We cannot use some mix that is already produced by, from literature. We could not actually understand how our printer would be able to print that particular mix. So it's very important to develop your own mix. You might have local materials, you might have materials that are locally available to you. The gradation is different, the maximum aggregate size is different. So we have to ensure that mix is developed first. So standard procedures were followed. You have ASTM C1437 for the flow, setting time C191. And these tests gave us early insights into how the material would perform, with this nozzle extrusion and stuff. One of the key challenges in both these aspects was balancing this workability, but also for strength, right? So the next process we did is, in parallel, we made sure these two material properties were in line with the compressive strength. So there were some baseline compressive strength results that we established, and how flow and setting time can be achieved for those sort of compressive strengths. Our goal, yes, is very strong mixes, but also it's important to see this three-dimensional problem with pumpability, buildability, the flow, the strength. So there are several parameters that are coming in play all together. So this is something we are showing here. We've made cubes here, and one of our very initial sort of specimen fabrications, and we used a compressive strength machine, the Forney, to get these results. Some of the early on trials and troubleshooting, if you look at few of these pictures here, we used high range water reducers in our mix. And if you see some temperatures, especially in winter, we would see more flow. And then in summer, with the same amount of high range water reducer, we absolutely saw stiff and clogged kind of mixes. So this essentially would absolutely clog the pump, right? And this one, the problem is, though the pump wouldn't be clogged, we had problems with settlement of layers due to too liquid of a mix. So this trial and error approach sort of taught us how sensitive the mix is to small changes in temperatures, in also some dosage related, like the pozzolans itself, and also, of course, water content. So our final mix essentially had pozzolans, high range water reducer, water, and also fine aggregates, which are 90% passing. I am not mentioning the exact particular ratios here. Our final report also has that. And we are still working through this. So you'll have more and more reports to be able to see that information if you're interested, or I'm absolutely happy to share that information and what we have here. We have to tailor those admixture dosages for flowability and durability, buildability. So we ensured that 90% passing of fine aggregates through 1.2 millimeter sieve was used. And if you see, at least 50% is passing through, 700 micron. So this was sort of a final mix, and the final parameters that we achieved through this mix was the YCAT setting time was 120 minutes. The 28-day compressive strength was about 78 MPa, like 11.5 KSI. And ideal flow, when we say ideal, temperature, with temperature studies in mind, we always shoot for a 7.75 inch flow table measurement. And 7 to 8 inch is the range we've established, but in our prints, we always target the 7.75 inches. So by systematically connecting all these fresh state properties with print outcomes, we've established these final parameters that we always use till now during the printing process. So here's some exciting things. Instead of me talking all the time, after establishing all that baseline, we made some simple experiments. Like I talked about, the buildability was key for us. So we synchronized sort of this material rheology and print speeds, at what speed the pump can, at what rate the pump can pump the material. At what time are we seeing some sort of a drying in the mix, or are there any air pockets that we are observing? So it was a highly curated, balanced validation of both our mix design workflow and also like the hardware setup as well. So the pumping rate and speed were quite a challenge. We sort of did a symbolic, we attempted something symbolic, printing our OU logo. It was not just a test of accuracy and control, but also we wanted to understand how this particular 3D printer can move beyond some simple geometries into maybe more complex, and even further complex could be sort of printed using this printer. Main thing is customized geometries. I remember how our student came up with these designs in SketchUp 3D, and we had to rescale them. The simplified 3D wouldn't accept, the G code wouldn't accept. So it's sort of a learning curve. So with our institutional setup in place, I think I'm in good time shape. Hopefully, Dr. Ali, let me know if I'm running late. With our institutional setup in place, the next step really was to focus directly on understanding these 3D printed interfaces. This is an ongoing study, but I will present a lot of videos and pictures that we have so far. We had the printer fully set up, our mix design optimized. We did some successful demonstrations to see if everything is working the way we want it to. And at this point, we shifted our focus to, really asking some deep scientific questions. So key is to investigate these deterioration mechanisms, the effect of them on 3D printed concrete elements. And we performed these studies at 60 and 90 days. We are not there yet, but we are still going to show you some observations that we have. Okay, to start with, we began the no reinforcement 3D printing. So if you remember from the manually created interfaces pilot study, we looked at different sort of scenarios with reinforcements. What we did first with our 3D printing is we essentially printed this block. Now you can see that it's a combination of both the aligned and the sort of a zigzag infill pattern. But it's a really good video that can show how tightly these layers are together, and also how this zigzag pattern is creating this sort of an interlock with the existing layers and the boundaries. Please also notice in the next slide here, these visible interfaces. This is after hardening process. You see a close-up of the 3D printed specimen. And each of these ridges represent that layer by layer to layer interface, right? And this doesn't look like the way cast concrete looks, right? That particular way, the material is monolithic. The 3D printed elements, however, here, if you see, they are fundamentally a layer on layer sort of a build-up. You can see there are still some sort of irregularities in printing, but just by an observation, you can identify there are some weak sort of seam lines, right? And the bond quality of these joints sort of dictates the structural performance. So it could fail prematurely, but it could be designed also. In our case, we want to put reinforcement in these interfaces. So you see some subtle gaps. There's also some roughness during the deposition that can be seen, which could help in friction. But over time, essentially, what we saw is how these sort of interfaces, when you place the reinforcement in there and subject it to chemical ingress, what could happen at these interfaces. Going back and just remembering those reinforcements that I discussed earlier, we use 4 types with different, fine grade, more of a woven fabrics, coarser patterns. We use the reinforcements as is and also use them with resin. Resin sort of becomes this impenetrable barrier. So that gives us a good sort of strategy as to see non-barrier related specimens versus barrier including specimens. So if you notice all these reinforcements, we use microscopes to actually get the opening size. That gives us a variable, right, between different reinforcements and different opening sizes. So it can also sort of give us a relationship between bonding with the cement paste, because there is eventually some sort of transportation of moisture from layer 1 to layer 2 that is built on top of it. So these variables can help us understand this. If you look at these videos here, this is of our GFRP reinforcement. So essentially, this is a glass fiber reinforced polymer. And you see these fabrics sort of laid on these specimens. We are doing 4 beams at a time. It's about a cubic foot of mix that we've calibrated and validated our mix design for. So every time we print, we ensure that this calibration parameters are stuck to. You see that the bottom second interface and the top second interface are where we place these reinforcements. We use the spirit level to sort of see if there is any inclination that we are looking at. So far, we've not seen any major inclinations. This is the glass fiber reinforced polymer mesh, and you see those mesh opening sizes as well. When we look at this continuous reinforcement printing, these interfaces, you see that they remain visible. And they are potentially those permeable interfaces, but we can learn more when we look at those observations. In this particular video, you see the same GFRP reinforcement, but what we did is we saturated it in resin. So it's not a wet layup on the printed specimen itself, but it's a pre-saturation that we did, removing any excess sort of resin that is already pre-mixed with hardener. And then we've placed these fabrics on top of the beams at those design interfaces and printed the next layer on. So you can clearly see how this sort of fabric is laid. Of course, we had to ensure there is more fabric than needed because we didn't want the fabric to sort of fall off during printing because the nozzle is moving and sort of has this vibration effect. In this slide, you're seeing the CFRP reinforcement, which in the Ashby chart, if you remember, is still a composite material, but it's carbon fiber. So glass fiber, carbon fiber, we've studied both these materials. Carbon fiber, if you again go back to the Ashby chart, is much more stronger than glass fiber. So maybe the hypothesis that we thought was maybe carbon fiber is better resistant to these aggressive environments and maybe less vulnerable compared to the GFRP. We also saw that in the pilot study as well, that carbon fiber didn't necessarily have too much of a degradation when compared to glass fiber. So the goal was to compare GFRP and CFRP in these printed interfaces, but also ask a bigger question where if there is an inherent higher stiffness in the CFRP, does it offset that environmental risk, or if the vulnerability is lower? If it's not, if it's only the interface that is dominating, then we need strategies also to improve that interface. So if here you see the carbon fiber placement itself, again, bottom second layer and top second layer. A very interesting parameter to this printing is notice that there is no external compaction applied to the layers, right? The nozzle itself, when it's printing, it provides that inherent compaction as it deposits the material. So this creates that pressure that actually stretches this embedded fabric during printing. And the stretching is important because how the reinforcement is anchored at the interface, that gets affected, right? And that will influence the bond quality and also the long-term whatever effects that we are trying to look into with chemical environment. So one thing that I like to understand from this video is it's a reminder how the 3D printing, this sort of advanced technology, it's the deposition process is really tied to not only the material, but also what's happening at the interface, what we are using at the interface. So this is all a tetrahedral problem, if you can say it. This again is the CFRP, but with resin, just like we did for the GFRP. If you can see here, this is that rolling process. When you dip the fabric in the resin, it's purely saturated, right? You don't want so much excess resin in those interfaces. So we are essentially using rollers. This is what we do in wet layer process, but we do it to make composite, laminates, laminas. But we did this sort of a pre-3D printing process. We saturated it with resin and made sure there's no excess resin. And we laid it on it and the printing sort of goes on. This particular one is the last one of our interface reinforcements, which is the steel reinforcement. It's important to understand steel reinforcement related, performance as well in these aggressive environments because it sort of gives us a benchmark. It's FRP versus steel, not necessarily, but we are trying to also understand how maybe this grid size could affect also. If you see steel, this is such a stiff mesh that we obtained, right? So during compaction, there's not any stretching or there's no effect of the nozzle compaction on the steel itself. So it's already very stiff and provides great strength. But because there is no sort of no effect under this compaction, maybe the sharp discontinuities can affect the overall printed element. We don't know yet. So we're trying to understand those aspects, but steel definitely provides that excellent strength and stiffness. So it's very important for us to understand too, as to if this can help us maybe tackle that durability problem. So now we're getting into the consequences of these exposures. So what we did here is you have left side in all the rest of the slides, you'll have the left or top slides to be the unexposed and the right side would be the exposed. Okay, so these are chemical ingress related specimens, 6% NaCl solution, maintaining pH less than 2 every single day. We are trying to understand if 30-day and 90-day sort of exposure. Here are the 50 days physical observation. We took them out of the chemical ingress paper, took pictures for this particular presentation, and we put them back. So they are sort of wet. You can see that dark contrast too. Now, if we look into these pictures, this is no reinforcement, right? We don't have any reinforcement at the interfaces, but there is, of course, some visible discoloration, and surface also appears a little more pronounced. There is sort of this at the interface more predominant discoloration than away from the interface, but it's again too soon to tell. 90 days might have more significant effects on the interface. Interestingly enough, if you look at the GFRP specimens that we put into the chemical ingress, the unexposed ones didn't show any discoloration. There were, however, some on the chemical ingress specimens, some these white deposits along the bottom interface. From our past studies where we've done some durability studies, we've seen ettringite being pushed out of the concrete itself because of the chemicals that are present in the chambers, especially sulfate and chloride rich. So these expansive ettringite can form and migrate towards voids and interfaces. And there is literature also to support that layered or cracked regions can act as preferential outlets for ettringite crystallization. So maybe they might be accessible pathways for moisture and ion. So we are trying to investigate more into that. This is a past study where they are showing these crystal-like structures. You don't see it more predominantly here, but you will see it in the CFRP ones, more pointing outwards. This one is the GFRP plus resin. I'm going to run through these slides quicker. You see this decoloration as well. Some sort of ettringite being pushed out, not too predominant, maybe because the resin is helping sort of be this barrier towards the chemical ingress. But if you see here, the interface is without the resin because resin was only used in the GFRP interfaces, right? So the others, there is pronounced decoloration happening. This could also mean like leaching, oxidation, sort of a process that is happening at those interfaces. But overall, the takeaway message is that there is action happening at the interfaces. So the CFRP really showed out those ettringite crystallization. Of course, remember that the CFRP fabric itself is dark colored, so it's difficult also to see what's happening. But we do see, again, some decoloration at some of these interfaces and presence of ettringite. In the CFRP plus resin, actually, this was the best looking specimen so far at 50 days. It's an encouraging sign that material selection and surface treatments can be tuned to provide some durability of these printed interfaces. With steel, we saw some sort of decoloration here and staining. Again, we did see some ettringite crystallization as well. There are some pores that we observed on the top surface, but this would also be related to the 3D printing aspects. So as we study, and so far we've seen all these interfaces, they could act as these preferential pathways for chemical ingress. We are also looking at another side of this where we see how polymeric coatings and resins can help us create some impenetrable barriers. So here you see this resin saturated 3D printed concrete specimen. Here also we see some sort of a mismatch. Essentially, we're trying to understand if tailoring interface geometry itself just trying to mismatch these layers of interfaces, can we reduce the exposure risk to the reinforcements within? One important aspect, which I'm afraid I have to run through very quickly, is workforce development, which is one of our major themes in this umbrella of 3D concrete printing. We want to highlight how this research can engage and train the next generation. And we here show you our workforce development efforts which connect directly to rural Oklahoma. These are some of our partner schools that we've established some relationships with through NSF RET program, which is research experience for rural teachers. So we introduce these teachers to material science and 3D printing, and we hope that they can go back and in their classrooms make them as meaningful learning modules for their students. So we are trying to meet students, but actually we are trying to meet them where they are. We're trying to bring these advanced material related research into their classrooms and labs. Uh, with one of these schools, we established even further a relationship to actually bring in the students to the lab as well. So they're mixing, they're testing, if some are running the equipment as well. Very exciting, and it's more tangible, right? And they are also seeing all these things first person. So this sort of engagement, we hope really builds the curiosity and creates some early pathways into STEM and infrastructure, and especially transportation careers. We also hosted some middle and high school students as part of the National Summer Transportation Institute, thanks to Dr. Ashik Ali and the entire team. They didn't just watch how we 3D printed, they also had a little bit of a fun sort of climbing on these already existing structures and all that. But these sort of programs really help us connect the pipeline from middle school and high school to the university level engineering research. In this presentation, I also want to take an opportunity to highlight this survey that we conducted through the NSTI workshop. The impact of our research can truly be determined through such surveys because it's a pre and post survey that we did during the 3D printing. There is clearly a shift before the program. For example, only a few students saw themselves using the 3D printer in their career, but after the 3D printing session completed and we conducted the post survey, almost all could explain some benefits, applications, sort of how we went by this work process. And we were really happy that the opportunity to expose them to hands-on 3D printing. And we were happy also to see the dramatic shift in the student perception. Finally, I also want to take this opportunity to explain to you the workshop that we are conducting. We are sort of scaling this work to undergraduate research experiences as well from middle and high school students. We're bringing in this program with undergraduates across OU for now, but hopefully in the future to the entire Region 6. And the key takeaway is from these undergraduate students who are in the workshop working together on these 3D printing problems. Our workforce development activity really wants to push the efforts to creating some next generation of engineers who will design, print, but also maintain the future of our infrastructure. I think that's key for us and also just the goal of SPTC. So I'd like to acknowledge the many groups that have made this research possible. First and foremost, Southern Plains Transportation Center, SPTC, for the funding and also supporting really this line of work. The OU SEIP program, which enabled us to actually build this sort of 3D printing infrastructure. And this is, it really brings everything you saw today. We have a lot of material partners that generously donates a lot of materials to us, especially these polymer related resins. And these are critical materials for our testing. I want to also take a minute to thank my research team. Again, without them, I'm just presenting the work, but it's all them behind the scenes. And I really want to thank them on this platform. So thank you all for the attention. And I really look forward to some questions if you have it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vemoganti. This is a great presentation with lots of good information on 3D printing and what facility we have at University of Oklahoma. Thank you very much. So I'm not seeing any question at this point, but if you have any question, please raise your hand. We may be able to just do a unmute and quick questions as well. If you have any question, please go ahead. So I have a question. So my question uh, is about the implementation side of it. So what do you think, how long it may take to go to the 3D printing on the implementation phase? And on also what are the application you see is most viable in short period of time?
Thank you for that question. So one of the things that I would like to address for that question is implementation. All that may be possible, but we don't have codes and standards that can actually guide us. So with that, there are no ACI standards yet. We depend on standards to make these structures possible. So, safety certifications, all these sort of parameters are still underway. There are committees, rigorously working towards this. So I'm really hopeful that on-site adaptability becomes much more feasible, and we can talk about 3D printing like we talk about traditional fabrication as well. But yeah, so I would like to address this question. There are several aspects to it: cost, workforce, everything. But one
Yeah,
really important parameter that I'm also working towards is codes and standards that can make this
sure.
possible.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Anyone else has any question? Please, I think at this point we can just unmute and ask that question.
You're most welcome to email me with any questions as well. I will include my email in the chat box.
Sure, sure, that would be great. Also, one thing I kind of I'm not sure. Do you see the problem related to shrinkage or collapse? Like, do you see much problem with shrinkage? Any cracks developing because of the when you're doing 3D printing, or I think you were very careful about the flow as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So naturally, concrete related material, you experience this sort of micro cracking, shrinkage. But in 3D printed concrete, especially if you have interaction between layers going on, it becomes even more complex because there's not just the material related parameters that are affecting these micro cracking, but also the equipment related parameters such as nozzle size, nozzle compaction. There's a controlled mix design like you saw, right? If you have sort of a change in the high range water reducer, you could see more of that lumping effect or some dryness. We do see
Mhm.
sometimes our print, if it goes beyond like 45 minutes, the final layers that come out see some dryness.
Okay.
So there is it's a really a tetrahedral problem that we try to solve every time we print actually. We want to make sure we hit the sweet spots of the timing, the material, the mixing, the speed. Yeah, so it's a
Mhm.
factor of multiple things.
Sure. Thank you very much. I know this is a very hard problem, but hopefully you will get a good solution to it as well. Uh,
Absolutely, absolutely.
Sure.
Mm.
Anyone else has any other question? Please unmute yourself and go ahead with your question. Uh, I don't hear anything.
Okay, yeah,
So I think we're good then.
okay.
So thank
We
you
can
very much,
we
Dr.
can go
Sriya
join our
Bhimagati.
faculty meeting now.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we have
Okay.
faculty meeting too. So thank you very much, Dr. Sriya Bhimagati. And please,
Thanks.
everyone, I request you, like, let's give a round of applause to Dr. Sriya Bhimagati for his very
Thank you
nice
so much.
presentation. And from his PDC side of it, we really want to see this going to the implementation phase as soon as it can. And we'll be happy to help on that one as well. And also, just if you have asked for a PDH, please, hopefully we will be sending out the PDH certificate soon. And also, we generally conduct a post webinar survey. So we will appreciate if you kindly respond to that survey as well. With that, thank you very much. Hopefully, we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.